The importance of the Constitution and the purpose of the delegates coming together and discussing and spending so much time trying to come up with this document was because they were looking for the perfect balance between all of the important ideas and concepts that were important to the United States regarding government. Citizens wanted a strong national government. They saw that under the Articles, the national government was too weak for it to really work in bringing a country together. So they wanted a central government that was stronger, but they also wanted to protect their popular sovereignty. Right? They still wanted the power of the people for the people to have their individual rights and have the authority, and yet find that perfect balance where the central government could still be strong. So it's this idea of balance that's really key to the creation of the Constitution. Federalism is an important concept because federalism then brings together this balance in which the state and the national government share powers and also each have the authority to have their own powers, right? And that keeps the power in balance between these two types of government. Power is shared by both the national and the state governments. And the Constitution then clearly states that any powers that are not stated within the document itself that belongs to Congress or the national government, therefore falls to the state. Right? So whatever is not specifically mentioned in the Constitution is usually believed to fall under the state and the state's governments that have power for that. So states have the power of their own local governments within the state. They have the power of education within their state, the chartering of corporations, how to start businesses. They supervise any kind of religious bodies, which means different kinds of churches or temples or anything that has to do with religion and the organization of different religions. They create and oversee their own criminal and civil laws within the state. And they also have the authority to protect the welfare of the citizens within their state. All right, at the same sense, the national government have their own powers that they oversee throughout the country. And then, as we have seen, they also share powers. Like in terms of education, we have state and national authority, right? Education is one of those things that falls between both governments. There's things that are different in terms of education from state to state, but then there are also kind of national state standards that the national government can say in terms of education. So it's a sharing of power between these two. The concept of checks and balances is also something very important in our Constitution. That's why we had the creation of three branches. Under the Articles, we had one branch because we only had a legislative branch, right? There was no executive branch, there was no judicial branch under the Articles. It was just the Congress. In the new Constitution, we decided to create three branches, and therefore was another way of keeping that balance, right? No one branch could become too powerful because they shared power and it balanced one another. You have the legislative branch who was in charge of making the laws, the executive branch who would be in charge of carrying out the law, and finally the judicial branch, which would be in charge of interpreting the law. And together, these three branches would check one another and make sure that everything was kept in balance as well. The road to ratification, eventually in September of 1787, right, 39 of the 42 delegates signed the Constitution. With the signing of the Constitution, that then allowed it to be passed to the states, because now the states had to review it, and each state had to agree to the Constitution. Now, technically, you didn't need all 13 states, you only needed a majority. So only 9 out of the 13 would be needed to pass the Constitution for it to actually go into effect. But because the Constitution was now this document that held the rules to our government, it was important that every state in the country unified and came together and approved the document. That way, everybody was on board. So the delegates really wanted all 13 states to ratify the Constitution. George Mason was one of those delegates of Virginia who decided to not sign the Constitution as it was. He and other delegates felt that a formal Bill of Rights was needed in order to be able to ensure citizens' own personal freedoms. And he really felt that was necessary in the Constitution. So he refused to sign the Constitution as is. And many other delegates kind of felt the same way. In our next section, we'll talk a little bit more about the ratification process and how it came about until finally the Constitution was signed.